So as people trickle in, I'll just kind of wait another few minutes. Hey everybody, thanks for dropping in. Um, I'll give it just another minute or two because I know that these lectures and classes and everything are just kind of like stacked really tight, which is awesome that they're available to everybody. But I just want to make sure that if there's anyone kind of being held over from one of the other talks, that they have a second to get over here. Yeah, exactly. Cat knows. Have you been checking out a lot of the other discussions going on? It looks like it's picking up. People are jumping in. That might be exactly. Yeah, see. Oh, the Disney one. Yeah, right on. Cool. Oh, yeah, good. Everybody's taking advantage. Great. Awesome. Cool. All right, I'll give it just one more minute and then I'll go ahead and start. I'll go ahead and get going. Here's a question. Did anybody go to or watch any of the stuff from yesterday? From the first day of the summit? I know that they were hosting a lot of it on Zoom as well. Oh, okay, awesome. I was there. Yeah, yesterday was a lot. It was crazy. I was telling I was telling my wife when I got home, she's like, "How was it?" I was like, "Well, it's like sitting and listening to three audiobooks in a row." Like my brain was full of so much information. It was pretty nuts, but it was really cool. Awesome. All right, so I think we have a great number of people to go ahead and get started. Because again, I don't want to I don't want to rush anything, and I don't want to run over on time either. Because as we just talked about, as people were coming in, there's a lot of these discussions going on, and I know that people are trying to plan their day accordingly and hop from one to the other. So I'll do my best to stay on time with this one, which is tricky because there's a lot to go over in such a short amount of time. But if anybody's taken my classes or lectures before, you know I am up for the task of cramming a lot of information into a really short window of time. So, welcome everybody. My name is Kris Wimberly, as you probably know because you came to this class based on the flyer. And basically, I'll start with who I am, just so you have a sense of who I am before we get into the details about this discussion. Or I guess more of kind of like one-sided conversation since I'll be talking at you mostly. Um, I'll give you my background. I'll tell you about some pathways to be able to break into the animation industry, which I successfully did some years ago and have helped dozens and dozens of other people get their first jobs in animation, which is pretty awesome. And then I'll tell you what to expect from the animation industry, so that you know like what the job looks like and what do they expect of you and what should you expect of the industry, right? It's kind of a two-way street there. And I'll kind of finish up with giving you some tips on, what you should think about when you're trying to apply for jobs or if you're going into school, coming out of school. When I say school collectively, I mean the higher education experience, which I'm going to talk about that as well, whether maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. There is no single way. Um, and then I would like to have some time for a Q&A at the end of this, as long as I can kind of belt through all the information pretty quickly. So, a couple of things. Number one, there are no slides. I'm not a slide guy. I am a very like, let's just discuss things. So, hopefully you have something that you can jot down your own notes. And the other thing is, as we're going through this, I know that people tend to like to add their thoughts and have side discussions go on in the chat. Normally I'm okay with that, but we actually don't have the Q&A feature unlocked for this conversation because I didn't think ahead to set that up before. So if you could do me a favor, let's reserve the chat box for mostly the questions. You can ask your question at any time, and then at the end when we do Q&A, I'll come back to it so that way we can just read that. Without losing people's questions, with a bunch of extra side chatter. That would be awesome if you can kind of keep that in mind. All right, so let's start with the most um, maybe the least interesting part, who am I? So that way you know kind of all of the information that comes from what we're going to discuss is literally real life experience from what I went through. And no, my way is not the only way, but it's a very interesting sort of jump-in point to this discussion. So here we go. For those of you just joining, I am Kris Wimberly, Kris with a K, that usually helps people remember. And I've been working in animation in the industry for over 15 years. And when I say in the industry, that means I've been working on TV shows, I worked on a couple movies, all kinds of stuff. But it literally for like big distribution levels. So not just side independent animation or things like that, but actual like large scale industry level work. So over 15 years. Um, I've worked at every major studio you can think of, right? That means uh, Disney, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Warner Brothers, Universal, uh, the list goes on. I've worked at all those places. So I've seen with my own eyes how they operate. I've literally been responsible for hiring people onto jobs, like the whole thing. My background is as a visual storyteller, so I'm a story guy, which means I definitely have done the whole storyboarding process. I have worked in 2D, CG, everything from preschool to kids TV to adult prime time. I've done everything from board driven to script driven type shows. Some of these terms may be lost on you if you're newer trying to learn what the animation industry is. So if you have a burning question about that, we'll talk about it later, some of those terms. But I just want to give you a sense of what I've worked on. And I've done everything from being an intern all the way up to, being in production, then working my way into storyboards, like I discussed, also working as a director, supervising director, up to show creator and executive producer on shows. I currently have a show in development right now at Disney TV Animation that I created and am executive producer on that as well. So literally, I've seen the entire spectrum of what kind of work there is out there in animation within the industry setting. And aside from that, some of you probably know because you saw the flyer again, or maybe you've seen me online. I am the co-founder and head of creative at a studio called Studio Smokescreen, which we also do. We are full service animation studio. So when you think of studios like Titmouse or Wild Canary or Oddbot or some of these other ones, we do a lot of that same service work, and we do we are a Black-owned animation studio, and we are the first of our kind, which we are calling a bridge studio, which means we specifically look for underrepresented groups and marginalized talent to elevate and support, teach them how to work at industry level quality, and then we help them find jobs within the industry at some of their dream studios that they've always wanted to work at as well. So we're sort of like a boot camp for these marginalized groups. That means people of color, women, queer folks, neurodivergent folks, like you name it, we are there to support them and teach them like how to do this craft at the highest level possible. So um, that's all my background in the smallest nutshell possible. But I'm going to unpack a little bit of that just so you kind of understand where that all started, a little bit more about my journey, just so you can see sort of a pathway that we can dissect a little bit more about what it looks like to work in the industry. So my background is not a very typical background. So if you're thinking that I'm going to give you the magic like keys to the kingdom so that you can create your own journey, I mean, I'm going to give you as much as I can, but the beautiful thing is there is no one set way to do this. And some of you may know that I used to host a podcast called The Animation Network for a number of years. And the kind of collective insight about that is that there is no one set way to do this, which is good news for you because that means that your path is your own. And I want to make sure that nobody feels like they're stuck doing it some certain way. Like you got to go to college, you got to get an internship, which we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Um, so in my family, I was the only artist. I was definitely not uh, one of a bunch that everybody kind of understood where I was coming from and what I wanted to do. That was the opposite of my experience. Um, I had to try to explain to my parents what I wanted to be when I grew up, and they just didn't see that for me. They were definitely in more of a, your brother's going to be the lawyer, you go into medicine. My sister wanted to be in education. They're like, yeah, that's a real job. We understand that one. So that's kind of the path that they saw for me. And so as I got older and realized that I really needed to do my own thing to make sure that I satisfy, that curiosity and scratch that itch before I abandon it, um, I went ahead and applied to art schools and I got in. Um, I went to a state school here in California called California State University at Fullerton, which was a rapidly growing art department at that time. I'm very proud that I was some of the earliest success stories that came out of that school on a really high level. And then we had this amazing explosion of other folks that came out of there. But it was just at a state school and it was extremely affordable. I didn't have to do crazy maneuvers and bending over backwards with really extensive portfolios and experimental films just to get in. Um, and so that was my path. I went on this more accessible way about getting a job. And then toward the end of school, I started hearing about things called internships. And I wondered what that was because I wasn't quite sure. And it was nothing that people in my family experienced or anything like that. So I looked into it by asking a lot of questions of the faculty at my school, and they showed me what that was all about. So when I learned that, oh, it's basically sort of like baby steps into what the job entails, and you get to learn about what that is firsthand. That's what I went for. And at that time, internships were unpaid, but generally, many internships, especially at the large scale studios, are paid positions now. Um, Interestingly, though, I used vacation time from my job to pay for myself as I was interning. So I kind of figured out a loophole there so that it wasn't like I was just um, working for free. Um, but that was, again, my own experience that I had to sort of be creative because I couldn't just spend time without making sure that I was supporting myself since I did support myself all the way through college doing that. But eventually I was able to turn that internship, which was at Nickelodeon, into a full job. And that was beginning as a production assistant. The show that I interned on was SpongeBob SquarePants, which then turned into a production assistant role on SpongeBob because I was able to show them sort of, what was important to me and what my work ethic looked like and all that sort of thing, which we'll touch on a little bit in a minute. And that was how I caught their attention. They offered me the full-time job, and that's how I broke into the industry. And then from there, I was able to work my way into the creative positions as a storyboard revisionist and onward, right? Um, Probably one of my favorite stories, because I have many about that path, was, coming from a marginalized background myself, my parents didn't really see that pathway. They didn't really understand it because there was nobody I could point to and say, like, see there what that person did? That's what I'm trying to do, right? Especially this is like the age before the internet, right? So it was a very different landscape, trying to find a way into this industry. And so it just didn't really like click for them what this job even was. Especially I didn't really have the language to explain what I wanted to do. So I would say things like, I want to be a cartoonist when I grew up. And they're like, what does that even mean? Like, you want to be like an editorial cartoonist? Like, you want to draw for the New Yorker? Like, what do you mean a cartoonist? You want to do caricatures at a theme park? And what I was trying to say was I wanted to be an animator. And later I learned, oh, I want to be a storyboard artist. Like, that's the thing that I needed to figure out. And once I was in my job, which again took a lot of years of fighting and pushing, and being creative and problem solving with my path, once I was working at Nickelodeon on SpongeBob, I was able to bring my parents to the studio and I sat my dad in my chair at my desk and I said, this is the job I was fighting for. This is what I was trying to explain. And their eyes were so wide with like awe about like, whoa, like this is an office. People are moving around. They're doing things. They're making money. They're like this is a real job. And I was like, yeah, that's what I was trying to get to. And even though a few years before that, my dad even told me, like, probably my fourth year of school, he was like, yeah, I still think this whole art thing is a phase. I was able to show them, no, this is what I was after. And that is what I want to be able to communicate to all of you today, because we have a mixture of high school students and their parents. We have people in college here. We have industry professionals who are also here thinking about maybe transitioning into animation or some other division of that. And we also have educators here as well who are teaching a lot of these folks that are on the call. So in this next chunk of time, I'm going to try to explain what that could look like with some variables. And so I'm going to do the best that I can to take probably what should be a 3.5 hour talk and squish it down into the next 40-ish minutes. So hopefully that was all clear and made a lot of sense to everybody. And then again, I'll make sure to come back and read the questions for some folks who might be trickling in. I know that people are jumping from talks to talks, so we're reserving the chat for questions only, or as few comments as possible, just to keep questions at the top so that we can come back and do Q&A at the end. Okay, so that's my background. And like I said, it's not the typical way, right? So what does that even mean? Like, is there other ways to get in? Yeah, absolutely. There's other ways into the industry. Um, let's pause there for a second and talk about the elephant in the room, as they say. If you're paying attention to a lot of the discourse that's going on online, you're probably feeling a little nervous, or maybe a lot nervous and a little worried about the state of our industry. And that's fair, right? There's a lot of concern about how rocky the animation industry is right now. the entertainment industry as a whole, but certainly our sector is not unscathed by what's happening. What is happening? A lot of budget cuts, a lot of diversity initiatives being dropped, a lot of shows being canceled, a lot of mergers happening with, you know, giant studios eating each other and becoming these mega studios. And then that means that there's redundancies. So people are losing their jobs. People are really generally kind of worried about the state of our industry right now. Why am I telling you this when you're here to learn how to get into the industry? Because this is how the industry works. There is a lot of ebb and flow that happens here. In fact, a lot of our discussions yesterday at the first day of the BRIC summit sort of revolved around what that looks like and what are we meant to do about that? How do we fix it? How do we repair it? And I think that there's a giant collective understanding that the industry works on a pendulum, right? If you've never heard what that means before, think of like a clock, right? Like a grandfather clock. Pendulum swings back and forth. And we go from one side of the spectrum to the other, and eventually we go back again. Case in point, when I came out of school, it was 2008. And if you weren't really alive long enough to know what that means, some of you do know what that means, it was a recession. There was a gigantic countrywide recession happening with Bush leaving office, Obama coming into office. Like it was a really bizarre time, much like today. And so, and we also at that time had a giant writer's strike, not as big as what just happened, but it was significant at that time and definitely affected the industry then. And I'm proud to tell you that in the history of my time in the animation industry, we see times like that in 2008. We see times where it goes to where Netflix was just extremely generous with the way that they were hiring folks into the industry, and other companies were doing similar things. It was a great time to be in animation. People had two, three freelance jobs lined up at a time. Like it was just like everybody was making animation, everybody wanted to get in animation. And now we're on our way back. Well, actually, now we're all the way back to the other side where it's the famine time and not quite feast. But I'm excited to say that I feel like, and this is my personal opinion with my own sort of set of experience saying this, that we're gonna have the upswing very soon. And it just has to be that way because the studios need to make content and material. And so it's gonna happen. So as we're talking about the next set of points, just keep in mind that yes, things are rocky now and everybody's got that green ring around their picture on LinkedIn, and some of them have been that way for a while. Um, we will return back. And so it is on you as individuals to be ready for that, right? And I know that's hard to stay excited and motivated, and hopefully I'm going to give you some things to replenish that excitement right now, because you don't want to be caught unready, right? So anyway, I just wanted to take that moment just to kind of say what I know is going to be on a lot of people's minds and probably head off a lot of questions coming up for the Q&A section later. So that's the current state of the industry. So here's some things that people want to consider about other ways to break in. First question I get a lot of times, how do I feel about college versus not college? And that is totally up to you. I can't tell you, there's not one answer, one size fits all answer. And the reality is, I feel like it really depends on what you're capable of in terms of time management, discipline, eagerness, passion. Like a lot of that drives how you treat both college and the course to not go into a later education, right? So I have seen very successful people get into the industry, have a full long career just fine without having taken one day of an art school or art college. But that's because they're very disciplined, right? To make that happen. So they're watching all the material they can online about how to improve their craft. They're reading the books, they're creating exercises for themselves, drawing exercises, that is, maybe also physical exercises as well. That's actually helps me a lot in my creativity. But, and there's a lot of workshops you can take now that happen around, um, especially around Southern California. And I know a lot of people are listening in from other areas, and that's great and fine. You just need to look for those things. So, can you make a career without going to college? Yes. Is it easier or is it harder? Who's to say? That really just depends on you as an individual, but it is possible. Okay, so there's that. And then the other thing is that kind of like directly ties to is, well, what about internships? Do you need to have one to break in? You did one, Kris. Do I need one too? And the answer is no. Like, what an internship actually does, well, there's two things. One thing it actually does is it puts you in the setting so you can see what the job is and do it a little bit on a very like small scale sort of way. And then the second thing, well, actually, and then to finish that thought, it shows you, is this even for you? Do you even like it? Right? Like some people I've met have gone into internships and realized, like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And this is a little more corporate than I thought it was. And I kind of had this other vision in my mind, whatever. There's lots of reasons why, but that is what an internship is great for. The second thing it's great for is making more connections because everybody's heard the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And there is some truth to that. It's not everything, but there is a lot of truth to that. If you've done an internship, you now know people in the industry that you can ask questions to about the craft or the industry. You can also hear things first about like jobs that are coming up and positions that might be coming available. People think of you first when they're like, oh, Megan just came out of college a month ago at whatever university a month ago. I bet you she's looking for a job. Let's take a look at Megan, right? So these are the kind of things that an internship can afford you should you decide to do that path. Although generally that ties to being a student at a university. So those are things to think about. Okay, other things to consider about how to break in, online forums, right? I'm sure mostly everybody's on things like LinkedIn. Well, I've learned not everybody is on LinkedIn, but that is one way to do it, and it's a growing way. And I can tell you for sure, guaranteed, I know this from the mouths of recruiters, they do use LinkedIn to find talent. And not just talent like artists, but also production folks as well and the like. So if you are currently looking for work and you're not on LinkedIn, that's a great place to be. Make sure you do that. Other forums are the career pages of the studios you want to work at. A lot of times they will post jobs there. And a little extra thing that some of you don't may not be aware of, they are legally required to post job openings, especially union studios, right? So if you've ever wanted to work at Disney or wherever, Netflix or wherever, they have to post those jobs and they do, right? So and they can't post fake jobs. So I know people get discouraged when they're like, oh, I applied to that thing and never heard back. So it either wasn't really available or whatever. Like, no, they have to post it, so it is a real thing, just they get slammed by a lot of applicants and things like that. So that's another way to keep your eyes open of how to get into these jobs. And then of course there's like Instagram and TikTok. I can tell you for certain that we, even myself as a director and things, when we're looking for people, we do go to those places and look for aspiring talent who's like right there. They just need a little more cultivating on their craft and things like that. But we look for them on Instagram or on TikTok and we see it's not about the likes. It's not about like, oh my gosh, this person got 237 likes on their Spider-Man fan art. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the person's craft, and then we will actually reach out to those people, or we'll have the producers reach out to those people. So don't be discouraged by feeling like I don't have more than 1,000 followers or more than like 5,000 followers. and all those jobs are being eaten up by the guys and women who have even more than that. Um, so keep that in mind. We do look at those places. Other ones, really quick, are conventions like Lightbox, obviously. We have WonderCon coming up. Any place that has artist alleys, recruiters are walking up and down those aisles and they are looking. And several aisles over, they're hosting portfolio reviews at their booths. And if you're there every day, you have a chance as a tabler, as a somebody who's at the convention, you can have access, better access, more FaceTime with those studios to try to find your way in. There's mixers, events like the BRIC Foundation putting on these sort of things. There's film festivals that you can attend where you can find people in these like-minded atmospheres and again have access to producers and recruiters, things like that. I mentioned earlier, there's workshops that you can take. A lot of you may have taken or at least heard of mine, especially if you follow me on places like Twitter, which is also a great place, right? Those online forums, um, where you can take these workshops. It's not just about collecting the information that you learn there, which is key and important, but it's also who else is it there? Like I have literally met people who were at physical workshops side by side who exchange cards or they just hit it off. And then again, now that's a person that when one person gets hired, they say, oh, check out my friend's work. We took this class together. Those kind of things do happen. So looking at workshops is really useful as well. Doesn't have to be in person, can be virtual. I've hired people myself, literally have hired people who have taken my workshops because I saw them there. I knew they got the information. It was good information because it was mine. So I know they know how to do the job. Of course, their portfolio also spoke to their level of professionalism and craft and passion to the art form, and I was able to hire them. So that stuff is really valuable as well. And don't forget, if you are in a place where you're not close to the industry proper, meaning LA, you can cultivate your own sort of like group experiences. Like you don't have to be a teacher. You don't want to set up like a life drawing workshop if you're not necessarily a life drawing expert who can teach people. But I remember people, and I think people still do this, at least maybe not so much after COVID, but certainly before, organizing group days to go to like a zoo and everybody's in their sketchbooks or tablets drawing animals together. But again, you're bringing these people together and you're finding more opportunities that way through those connections. Other ways to get in real quick are collaborations, working on each other's films, right? If you're meeting these people all the time, oh, I need a board artist. Oh, I do boards. Great. Being on places like Discord, in areas like that, it's really easy to find these sort of mini projects you can work on that then you can add to your portfolio. Or if they get submitted to a film festival, boom, your name is in the credits. People are seeing that. I was literally at one last night where it was filled with people watching these films, everyone from high school age to like seasoned professionals have their work up there, getting it recognized. And people were remembering names and thinking about setting up meetings with this person or that person. So that's another great way. Um, and the last quick note about that before we move on is I also get a big question about specialization versus generalizing. Um, that again is up to what you're after in terms of the job you want, right? Like if you want to be at maybe a small boutique house, then yes, it's great to have a broad portfolio that shows lots of work. You can do prop design, you can do background painting, you can do boards. And by the way, you also have a voice actor part-time. Great. You can do that and showcase yourself that way. But generally at the bigger studios, it's a lot more concise, the roles. So you may be looking more toward specializing if you want to work at a place like, Disney's been coming up a lot. So let's just say Disney or Smokescreen. We hire people specifically for that role. And because we want people who are like excellent in that craft and have room to grow, we don't just want people who are already A plus plus artists. We look for people to help grow their experience in their skill set. But that is when you would want to specialize is like, I want to be whatever it is, a layout designer. That's it. I eat, sleep, and drink perspective. Like that's my jam. Okay, great. So now you want to specialize, but knowing where you want to be is how you cater to those eyeballs, meaning the recruiters or producers, people who are looking to hire you. And that is how you capture their attention, right? Is by knowing what it is, having a stronger sense of what you want to do. It's not, doesn't have to be your forever position. As you've heard my story of growing through different things. At one point, I did do a lot of design work too, props and characters, things like that, just to kind of satisfy an internal um, craving I had to do that. But I didn't stick with it very long because my bigger passion was in the story part, right? So you can pivot, but it's easier to break in if you kind of know uh, where your passion lies, and so you can sort of speak to that a little more directly. Okay, so let's switch a little bit to talk about, all right, you have all these amazing avenues, you picked one, maybe you hopscotched a little bit, but you found your way and you're in the industry. Now, what do you expect? Like, what does that space look like to be in there? Okay, so here's a little bit of realism for the listeners first, just so that you have a understanding of what we're talking about. Earlier, I said industry jobs, industry level. That means broadcast quality. Broadcast means it's on some big screen, right? TV, movies, whatever, streaming, whatever. That is what I'm referring to when I say industry. So, what is that? What does that mean? At the end of the day, this is a job. It is a job. That may be a big turnoff to some of the people listening to this. Or that might be a sigh of relief for, like I said, if my parents were listening to this, they would be like, oh, that's what I wanted to hear. Yes, this is a job at the end of the day. So, what does that mean? That means that you are being paid to, and being paid well, I might add, to be creative on command. Some people don't have the desire for that, right? They're just like, no, like now that I know that, and again, maybe you learn that because you have a really great educator who pre-warned you about that, or maybe you had an internship that showed you, oh wow, we've had interns and some production people at Smokescreen who are in love with the process, they're in love with the craft, they're in love with the industry itself as a whole, but once they saw with their own eyes, they're like, oh, I thought I wanted to be a background painter one day, but I can't paint that fast. Like for me, it's more therapeutic. It's a little more meditative. Like they maybe just don't want to do that so fast and on command. Now you know that that's a reality. This is a job at the end of the day. It's a very fun job. And let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah, this job is awesome. I've never eaten so much birthday cake in my life, right? Like it's amazing. Like it's so much fun. We're constantly doing, well, and I'm speaking a little pre-pandemic now, but lots of outings, lots of like culture building, a lot of nerding out about stuff with people of like minds. Um, whatever your fandom is, is 100 people you get to share that fandom with who will work right next to you, and in their cube have a bunch of stuff just like piled everywhere, right? As some of you can tell, my fandom is Batman, and so that's a really fun part of the job, and it's inspiring. It makes you feel full in a way that it's hard to describe, right? And it there are some days where it feels unfair. Like there are people who do jobs that maybe they love, but are very, very hard, right? Like I don't want my wife's job. Side note, she's an astrophysicist. I don't want that job at all, not even a little bit, right? Um, it's a really hard job. I get to like do the same thing that I've been doing since I was 4, right? And they pay me a lot of money to do that. So that's really amazing and really fulfilling. And I get to wake up and enjoy that nearly every day. Again, it's a job. Some days are hard, but that's something to consider about what the job looks like. Um, there's creative fuel for everybody, not just artists, but producers and voice actors, also the writers, the editors, the interns who come in, the people in finance, the lawyers, the law team. Like literally everybody is fueled by this creative energy of like, whoa, we literally made something from nothing. Like nothing. A blank screen in our case. It used to be a blank page, but maybe also still a blank page. And then there was something, and then people were like, "That's my favorite show ever," right? And then they reboot it two or three times, or there's spin-off movies from it, and all kinds of amazing stuff. And that's just really inspiring to know that that exists in this line of work. Um, One thing to consider is, and this is again on that realism, that realistic note, it is a job. You are part of a machine. You are paid to do the thing that we really need you to do, right? And that's why we do look for people sometimes who specialize because we need to make sure that that thing is covered and covered well, right? Because it's part of a system or like I said, a machine, and if some cog or piece is out of whack or it's not quite working, the whole thing breaks down, right? So that is something to keep in mind. And, some productions might be more fun to work on than others. I have worked on shows that I was like, well, it's not my favorite show. Yes, it pays the bills, and yes, I am doing artwork and all that sort of thing, but it's not my favorite one. And I've worked on amazing shows, right? I've worked on SpongeBob SquarePants. I've worked on Teen Titans Go. I've worked on Curious George, Elena of Avalor, like really amazing properties that really inspire people and make them laugh and entertain them. But I had to do my part to make that work, right? And some people may not find that as fun as being part of something where they have more control over it themselves. Um, in that way, you can feel sectioned off sometimes. Like that is a reality. Like you have a desk or a cube, or nowadays you might be working from home a lot, which means that you will be doing that work kind of by yourself a lot of times until it's time for a check-in or meetings of different sorts. Um, and sometimes you can be typecast, right? Oh, that's a comedy storyboard artist, or oh man, that's a realism painter. Like we need something more cartoony. Like sometimes it's hard and you get stuck or pigeonholed in one thing and you need to break out and you have to work two or three times harder to show like, no, I can do whatever. You've been doing adult primetime comedy with a lot of like, really coarse humor, but you really want to get into like preschool stuff and like I want to show you like I want to do those musicals that like kids remember and they love. You have to do a lot of work to break out of this like edgy humor thing to show that you can do this other thing, and sometimes that just takes a lot of extra work to do that, but there is room for growth, which is a great part of this industry. Like there's a lot of I've seen people switch from production to creative or vice versa. I've seen people go from uh, uh, you know, being an artist to a writer. I've seen people go from like myself, an intern, up to an executive producer. There's a lot of room to maneuver there, which is the amazing thing about this industry. And the last quick note about that stuff, there's a lot of meetings and deadlines and notes, right? Like that's the sort of thing that I feel like people kind of forget when they're working so hard to break into the industry is that, like I said, you're being paid pretty well to be able to uh, be, funny on command or be inspirational or whatever it is, even if you're a composer, right? And you're writing music for the thing, you have to be so compelling. Like, how are you gonna pull those heartstrings and make the people's eyes water, right? With this score that you're crafting. Well, you only got a week to do it, so you know you better get going. Um, and that is just a real reality of the job, and getting notes sometimes is a really hard part of the job. You have to keep in mind that it's all for the benefit of the project as a whole. And by the way, everybody's getting notes, not just you. So it's not something you take to heart, but it does happen. Sometimes they're really challenging notes, but they are notes to help you grow in your craft. But some people don't do well taking feedback, and sometimes you want the feedback, but you don't do well implementing the feedback. There's things to consider because it's a job, and we are here to do that. Um, so that's kind of what it looks like, the day-to-day mechanics of working in the industry. What can you expect about the industry as sort of like as a whole? I would say like you never really arrive, right? Like there is no moment where you're like, ah, I made it. You think you'll feel like that once you get your first one. You're like, oh, I just need to get my first one and then I'm in. But I got news for you. In this sort of like gig economy and this sort of like the days of, going into a business or a company and staying there 40 years and then retiring and all that sort of thing, it just doesn't really exist anymore. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. It depends on your perspective. For me, I love it because I have a very short attention span, and that's why I've worked on I don't even know how many shows that I've worked on because I've worked on so many projects. But I love that. Some people don't, right? That's uneasy for them. Why? Because that means projects end, right? Everybody knows that a show doesn't last forever, right? Unless it's The Simpsons. Um, and that means that people get laid off. That's a reality of our job. What is a layoff? It doesn't mean you get fired, but it means you have no more job as of uh, you know, April 24th, right? And then what do? Well, you got to go find your next job. And guess what? There's a lot more kids coming out of school with their amazing portfolios, right? Who might, draw you under the table. Or you have veterans who've been doing it, who worked on your favorite shows and your favorite movies that inspired you to be there, and you have to compete with these people for the next job. So it doesn't really feel like there's ever this really super strong sense of security in the industry. That's just the way it is. I'm sorry to break hearts right now. But if you know that, the earlier you know that, then the more you can be prepared for it. And I feel like this is not just experience talking from the other side of that. Like I prepared. I knew that going into the industry meant always having to find the next job. So I was always stacking up on extra assignments or freelance or overtime, things like that. Some people are great at saving money and squirreling it away so they can take 2, 3 months, 6 months off sometimes between shows. That's up to you and how you treat it. But if you know that going in, you're going to be a lot more successful about that. Um, what else can you expect? Technology is always changing, right? I know that somebody's going to ask the AI question if they haven't already, and I'm going to abstain from that conversation just because we don't have much time. And there's literally every other panel is going to be talking about AI, so I'll leave that for them. But technology is constantly growing. I literally watched paper disappear from animation. When I came out of school and started working in the industry, I watched paper disappear. And it was bizarre, but the industry not only survived, it thrived, right? Because we had this big upswing that happened right after where tons and tons and tons of stuff was being made because we're able to make it faster and more elaborate and all kinds of things. So that's something to consider. And in that way, it's kind of like I used to say this jokingly to people, and if you're a doctor, I apologize. I don't mean to offend anybody, but our industry is kind of like being a doctor where you have to stay up on how the industry is moving and what new technologies are coming out, because if you don't, you will get washed out. And that is just how it happens. And I watched it happen to people who didn't learn how to draw digitally and they struggled with drawing in before Storyboard Pro, it was drawing boards in Photoshop, which was extremely complicated. But anyway, the point is you do have to stay up on top of that sort of thing. It's really important. Also, I think you can expect to be part of a community that cares. It's very supportive, right? Like you just go look at all of the people on all these different forums and platforms talking about the way the industry is and what's important and what we should think about. All those sort of things are really important. And people are generally on the right side of the fight. And that's really inspiring and really comforting to know that you're not by yourself in the industry as a whole, right? Even when you are out of work, you're not alone, which is really, really great. And that's part of the way that the union works too, if you were to work in the union setting and system. And then last couple of thoughts, real quick. Um, I know that, again, especially if there are educators and parents listening to this, let's get to the biggest burning questions. Can you support yourself? Yes, which is why I entitled this talk "The Not So Starving Artist," because that's what my parents thought. They're like, "Have you ever heard the phrase starving artist? We don't want that for you. You can buy a house. I've seen it. I asked before, like when I was earlier in my career, I asked directors, like, so, like, how did you buy a house? Like, you know, this show is going to end after this season. Like, isn't that scary?" And they're like, "No, it's you can still live and have a family if that's something that you are looking forward to, like all those sort of things. Being in the union, we have amazing benefits. I mean, like outstanding benefits that come. And when I say benefits, I don't just mean like, oh, we get discounts at, well, virtually everywhere. Like literally, working at Disney, you get discounts like everywhere. But I also mean you get benefits like dental and vision and, obviously the regular doctor, stuff like all of that stuff gets covered under the motion picture industry, which is amazing. So yes, you can support yourself well. With this industry, especially if you have the patience for getting through these rough patches like right now. Um, and so yeah, like that's kind of what you can expect and what's expected of you to work in the industry. I'll leave you with a really just a few like great tips for making that happen, and then we'll get to Q&A because I'm like 5 minutes behind where I wanted to be. So the first thing is if you are looking to break in right now, like maybe you haven't had your first gig, or maybe you're an intern, or you want to do that course, see where you can fit in and take that spot over. Like make yourself indispensable, right? The way that I looked at my internship was if I can find a crack in this well sort of crafted sculpture, and if I can fill that crack, they will see me as necessary, and it worked. That's why they offered me a job. To be more specific, because I'm like, digital native. Well, I'm like on the cusp of that, right? But coming out of school, I was learning all of these new softwares and things. I was able to help implement those processes into the pipeline of production where they were like, how did we not know that? We need to be doing that more. And that's why they could see that I'm a valuable person for that. So whatever that means for your experience and your path, find where you can make yourself relevant in that thing because everybody has something special to offer. Even if you're not sure what that is now, you're valuable in some way. Figure out what that is and plug it in. Okay. The other thing I would say is find, and it kind of links to that, find what you're strongest at or what you have the most interest in and really lean into that thing. Because if you can do that, then that is what equates to this big word we hear all the time, passion, right? That equates to passion. And that's what excites people to learn more about you, to give you a chance or an opportunity, right? Find out what you're good at or what you're most interested in. I said that very specifically because that means you might be really interested in something that you're not super great at yet. But if you know what you're most interested in, you can get better. And that's what people want to see. They want to see promise out of the person that they're looking at, right? Um, Another big, really important thing is to learn how to hone a critical eye, a keen eye for your own work. Like, be honest with yourself. Am I really good at this, or do I have some work to do? How do you do that? If you are a character designer, look at your character designs and then go look at your favorite character designers, especially ones that have achieved the level of success that you want, and be honest with yourself. Does my stuff look like theirs? Yes or no? Not kind of, yes or no. And if the answer is no, what is missing here? Like, what did I, like, where are my weak areas so that you can improve them? The people who can do that the most, the best, they are the ones who get the jobs. That is just the truth, because otherwise you won't grow or elevate in your particular craft. Okay, and then the last thing I want to leave you with is a question of, now that you know all this stuff, is the industry for you? You need to really think about that and consider it. Because maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you're more excited now. Maybe you're less excited now. Either way, that's great. Sit with that for a little bit. Discuss it with your educators, discuss it with your parents, ask more questions. Find people like me, not just me, like me, who are all over the internet, who will give you answers to help you decide if this is something you really want to pour a lot of time, commitment, patience, frustrations, like everything that all of the resources that will deplete you have to be poured into this. Do you really want this or not? That is a question that only you can answer, but it's probably important that you do. Okay, that's the end of what I wanted to say. Hopefully I said something useful to somebody there. I'm going to quickly start toward the top for the people who had questions, and I'm just gonna try to blast through these things as fast as I can. I promised you I'd be done by 2 o'clock. That's in 5 minutes, so that if you want to leave to another thing, you're more than welcome to. If I go over by a few more minutes, this is being recorded, so you can leave. But here I go. Okay. Um, that is not a question. That's a thing. That's close though. This is a long question. Let me get to the heart of it. I've been writing this first feature film. How to use Blender and all this kind of thing in this industry, given my academic background. See, I plan on getting an MBA in 2025, but what can I do now to make me stand out? Um, yeah, that's a deep one. Okay, so Lily, I think that it's hard to say without actually like looking at the work that you're doing. And right now it is hard to like stand out. All you can do is really like show that you're dedicated to the thing that you're interested in, like I said a minute ago, because that equates to passion and that's what people look for. And I know that's such like a whatever word now because it's like so overused, but I think that's really the answer is like we just want to see that you care about what you're doing. And more than just like, well, I'll drop a few pieces here and there when I feel good about it. But like, are you constantly working on it? Do you always have new stuff to show? Things like that. All right. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Questions. Did anybody have did anybody have to fall back on a different field to live other than what they studied for? That's kind of a question for the chat that I'll skip, but the answer is yeah, that happens every day, all the time to everyone. Um, I'm very stubborn. I literally had a mantra that was there is no plan B. My parents hated that mantra. That my parents hated that mantra, but that is how I chose to live my life and I made it work. That is not advice. Please understand that is not advice. I'm just saying that that's the way I thought about it. There is no plan B. And here I am giving you this talk today. But it is not uncommon and it is acceptable to change paths or have a fallback or pivot, as we call it, whatever. That is totally okay. Um, some of you may do that after hearing a set of bad news I just delivered to you today. You might be pivoting after this lecture. Um, Questions. I'm just looking for question marks. Oh, thanks for being here, BRIC volunteer, whoever that is. Um, I'm a recent grad. Okay, this is a longer question. I'm a recent grad from Long Beach State. Hey, another Cal Stater. And I currently taking some classes at Fullerton College. Nice, that's a great play. They have great arts classes there. To build your portfolio, my interest lies in visual development, related especially to background design and prop design. I've been applying to entry-level positions and internships, trainee programs. Oh, that's another one. Apprenticeships, trainee programs and fellowships. Those are also great ways to break into the industry. Thanks for bringing that up, Anna. Um, any tips on anything I can do to stand out when applying? This is kind of like Lily's question, or maybe things to avoid in portfolio or during applications. Yes, the one thing I didn't say, because this is usually like my portfolio lecture that I give, one of the best things you can do to break into the industry, or if you're in the industry, stay in the industry, is to show that you understand what the job is. That is in my book, that's probably the number one thing. Well, I mean, other than being good at the job, but understanding what the job is. For example, real fast, if you are let's say you're focused on background designs and prop designs. Do you know the difference of how to design for a 2D prop versus a CG prop? And what are all the things, all the requirements to design a successful 2 or 3D prop? If you don't know the answer to that, then I guarantee your portfolio doesn't show it. It's harder for me to know that I can use you, right? As opposed to somebody who clearly understands what that means, and I can see it right there on the page or the screen, right? Those are the kind of things that you can do to stand out. But like literally, you will cut to the front of the line in applications if you can show whatever this is kind of to everybody. If you can show you understand what the job is, that's how you do it. Okay. How can you get into the studio when you're not recently graduated and you do not have any experience in the industry? Um, so there's two ways to look at this. There's the way that like everybody else did it, and that's the answer it sounds like you're looking for. And there's the other answer where you are creative, you need to be creative on how you can do that. Case in point, uh, if you, I didn't get to go into this, but some of you who've done your research on me will already know this. The way that I started in the industry, actually, like I gave you like the college story, I started as a custodian at Disneyland. Now I have my own show and I'm an executive and supervising director and working on like 4 shows at once at Disney, right? So you need to figure out what is the best way to get in. And if you're waiting for somebody to discover you, you might be waiting for a long time. And I've talked to those people who've been waiting 2, 5, 7 years after school. It's because you're not thinking differently, right? Think differently. Like, what can you do? Am I saying you should go be a janitor somewhere? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's the thing that I thought of. I was like, okay, what's the biggest company that I can start anywhere and then work my way up? Oh, well, I go to Cal State Fullerton, which is 20 minutes away from Disneyland. In fact, everybody works there. We used to call it Cal State Disney. But I'll go knock on the door, ask for a job, and they're like, great, you could be a custodian. I was like, all right, bet. I'm gonna start as a custodian. One day I'll be animating for Disney. I literally told that to my interviewer. Her name was Cherry, and she giggled and she's like, okay, great. And here I am, right, giving you this talk. So it's not about internships always. It's not about who you know, but it's about what can you do to make the most out of your everyday experience. Go work at Barnes and Noble so that you have access to all of the art books and all of the filmmaking books and all of the like books on story that you can possibly fill your head with right there at your fingertips. Do whatever you can to figure out like something creative about your position because a lot of other people are struggling doing the same thing and they're just kind of waiting to be discovered. Okay. Um, where are we at? 203. I'll go for a few more minutes, but I know that people want to jump to other talks. So, what is the process like moving to a place like California or Los Angeles to start your career in animation or any production? I cannot answer that because I grew up here in Southern California. However, this was the age before the internet. So I could not point to Burbank on a map. Like Burbank could have been on Mars for all I knew, all I did know. So I can't say what it's like to move across the country or internationally, even like some folks do, right? There's working visas out there. That's a whole other topic. But I can tell you that people do it, and it's a matter of being prepared, right? You got to find somebody who has done it. And by the way, people on like Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, love to talk about their experience of moving. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a little more scathing, and that's why they're talking about it because they're dissatisfied with their experience. But there's truth in it, so you should know what those hardships are. And maybe to you, they're not going to be that big of a deal. You're like, oh, that's not a thing for me. Okay, great. But at least you know some of the realities of that path. Um, Otherwise, find people who maybe also have positive things to say and just kind of do the work that way. But I wish I could answer that for you. I can't, unfortunately. Um, Knowing the career might be unstable, cost of living may play a huge factor. Oh, that was to the comment above. Yeah. Yeah, you just got to ask questions and prepare for whatever that reality could look like for you. Um, Another question, generally internships are reserved for students or recent graduates. What would you recommend for young professionals early in their career who are looking to break in the industry and want to gain experience? I kind of already explained that just a moment before. Go be a custodian. Um, May you follow up with me on LinkedIn? I think I saw that in a couple other questions too. For any additional questions, look, um, I know BRIC would love for me to say yes, and I want to say yes, that I would love for everybody to hit me up on LinkedIn. Yes, you can try, and I will try to add everybody, but my days generally are so packed, it takes me a long time to get back to people. Ask away all you want, and I will do my best to get back to you. Um, I'm a story artist interested in doing internships at Studio Smokescreen. Oh, cool. Well, you would be welcome. Is that possible for someone who lives in South America or only for US residents? Um, we are technically a non-union studio, so we are able to look for people outside of the LA market. So the short answer is yes, you are eligible. Um, and again, going back to our mission of looking for underrepresented communities, well, if in animation, if you're not in LA, that does kind of already qualify you because you're outside of the typical market. But you know, there's a lot that goes into that. But thank you for asking. And Smokescreen would be lucky to have you. Let's see, looking for question marks, and then I think we're gonna have to cut it off at 2:10. Um, let's go with, oh, Megan. And I used an example of a Megan earlier, I think. I've noticed that a lot of internships in the industry ask for junior, senior, or recent graduates. What is your opinion on students who haven't enrolled yet into bachelor's programs but have enough units to be considered junior standing? That is Oh, let me finish the question. I'm reading ahead. Sorry. So the question is, what's my opinion on people who have enough credits to be considered junior standing for those internships? And is it worth the time to apply? Okay, look, I am of the mindset to always apply for anything that you should be able to do. And I put that weird caveat on it to say, like, don't apply for a VP level job if you're not, just because you're like, well, Kris said always apply for everything. No, apply for things that you should be able to do. You should be able to be an intern because it's not a a role that requires some grand amount of experience and expertise. But just keep in mind, you may not be eligible, but I'm always of the mind to apply anyway because sometimes attendance is low. People didn't see the post or the call for applications, and you might, by default, you might accidentally get the job, the position, right? Like you just never know. Again, if you're showing the passion, if you're showing the commitment and dedication to what you're trying to do, it will be noticed, it will be rewarded. It will be noticed, it could be rewarded. So why not take your shot, right? So I would say go for it. That's my opinion on it. By the way, Smokescreen will be hosting next week a discussion for free, open to everybody, up front with a recruiter talking about a lot of these same things. So we can move some of those conversations there. Um, are there any key words or hashtags that I would recommend for aspiring artists on Instagram? That takes research. I can't tell you because the hashtags are infinite. So you got to go take a look and just do the work, right? If you think that'll help. But you know, yeah, I don't have a concise answer to that. That's a long one. I'm a character designer and a line producer looking for new opportunities. Do you think it's better to focus on just one thing, or is it okay to apply for both? Absolutely apply for both, given what I just said a minute ago. Do you think the dual experience would be considered something desirable when studios look at my profile? Yes, all experience is good experience, especially if you're experienced in the business of making animation, right? Like if you know how to do it, then I don't have to worry about you blowing up the timeline and the schedule because you're trying to perfect it and get it just right. You're a line producer. You understand how um, time equals money and what that means to get the project across the finish line, right? So you would be valuable, but you have to make sure to A, be able to do the job, and B, kind of like craft your application and submission in a way that shows that you have that passion for the artistic side, but I have seen people cross over, so consider that. Okay, last one. Question, as a recent grad looking for entry-level story and PA roles, I often feel my applications get lost at large studios. Okay, yeah, I thought this might come up. Um, how would someone expand their knowledge of smaller animation studios? I know using LinkedIn is one option, but there are lesser known resources. Are there lesser known resources that you would recommend? Oh, and you found out through Studio Smokescreen through a professor of mine. Oh, Steph Troncoso. Yeah, Steph's legit. Okay, so there are some spaces, especially if you belong to one of these marginalized groups, there's a lot of resources for those pockets, right, of places to look. They will compile studio like logging, like here's all of the studios, here's which ones are union, here's which ones are not, here's which ones offer at union scale or better, here's which ones are currently looking for things, or here's which ones don't exist anymore. Like there are databases out there, and if you belong to some of those groups because they're helping to try to like spread that knowledge, you would have access to that knowledge. I used to keep a database when I was running the animation network of all the list of studios. Most of them still exist, some don't anymore. But there's no like almanac or something that you can find. Unfortunately, there's not like a book that tells you all of it. But there are. This is a great question for the internet because they will tell you where to go find it. But they do exist. Yeah, those lists. All right. So I know some people hung in there a little bit longer to hear more questions. I wish I could go through, but every time I answer one, more pops up, which is really exciting to me. But unfortunately, we probably should cut it off so people can get to um, other discussions going on. But thanks so much for everybody joining and excuse me. Please feel free to find me even online. I try to do my best to answer questions there as well, and also drop a lot of these nuggets on places like Twitter. Um, and you can try to not try. You're more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn as well, and I'll do my best to go and scrape and get everybody who is interested in that. Um, and thanks for coming to this brick talk, man. It's really enjoyable to share some knowledge with you. Hopefully, it was useful. Thank you all for listening. See ya. Awesome. Oh, you guys are so everybody's so nice.